In this video, I'm going to show you the settings that I use on my GoPro to capture really good footage for mountain biking, gravel riding, and also kayaking. Now, this video is going to apply to most sports that you do, but those just happen to be the main ones that I participate in. Also, I'll be showing you this on the GoPro Hero 11. However, this video will apply to most GoPros that have been purchased within the last few years. There are a few settings unique to the GoPro Hero 11 that I'll point out in this video, and I'll talk about those in case you have this camera or really any GoPro produced after this. So to capture really good footage, there are two main things that you've got to focus on. One is the settings, the other is the mounting options, and a few other tips and tricks that I'll actually cover in a separate video. But this video, like I said, is going to focus on the settings. So let's get into it. All right, I've got the camera in video mode. Before I go into the settings, I want to talk about the shortcuts that I have on the screen. I have one for white balance, one for lens, and then one for the color. It's personal preference, but those are the ones that I choose. I've also got one up here for the media mod audio, but we're not going to worry about that for this video. The quickest way to change your shortcuts is to just hold down on one and then scroll through the list and find the one that you want to select. So that was lens, so I'm going to leave it there. Now let's look at the settings. There's two ways you can get to the settings. You can tap here and then go to edit next to the one that you want to change. But what I typically do is I just hold down here and that jumps right to the settings. The first setting that we'll look at is the frame rate, aspect ratio, and resolution, all of which are found in this top left setting. Most of the time I leave mine in 16:9, which is a landscape. I rarely use 4:3. Unique to the Hero 11 is this 8:7, which is basically one big square. And so when you're editing the video, you can choose whether you want portrait or landscape. So it gives you some options, but like I said, most of the time I leave it in 16:9. As far as resolution, I will typically leave it in 5.3K. Sometimes you can use 4K if you want a smaller file, and that's about as low as I go for resolution. I just like taking advantage of these modern cameras and getting the highest resolution I can get. Now, as far as frame rate, I will most of the time leave it in 30 frames per second. That is, to me, the best mix between something that looks more natural to the eye and still has some pretty good detail. Sometimes I'll use 24 frames a second. That also is used by a lot of videographers to get the most natural what the human eye can see, but I will leave it in 30 frames per second. 60 frames per second looks like a soap opera. I don't like it as far as normal. Now if I want to slow down the video, yeah, it's good, but I leave it in 30 frames per second. The lens, so most of the time when I'm mountain biking, I'll leave it in super view. Now, unique to the Hero 11 is hyper view. And that is a pretty cool setting because it makes it look like you're going really fast. But super view is what I use most. And hyper view, like I said, is one of those options that I'll choose sometimes. Hyper smooth, I always leave it in boost. For the Hero 11, you've got this auto boost. I don't really use that. I just leave it in boost. Now let's go down to these Pro Tune settings. Also unique to the Hero 11 is the 10-bit color, which I leave on. If you have the Hero 11, leave it on 10-bit color. It's going to give you the best color range. Bitrate. This is one that's going to be a preference. I did a video where I compared bit rates and I really didn't see much of a difference. However, if I just want the absolute highest quality video I can get where file storage size doesn't really matter to me, I leave it on high bitrate. If you're going to be dumping this off to a mobile phone and you really don't want these massive video sizes, the file sizes, then put it in standard bitrate. You're not going to see much of a difference. Also, the iPad that I have is about a 2-year-old iPad Pro, and it cannot handle high bitrate videos. I have to leave it in standard bitrate if I'm going to edit on my iPad. So you may want to kind of test this with your computer or whatever you're going to be editing on or putting these videos on to make sure it can handle high bitrate. I think most people are going to be fine leaving it in standard. If you want the absolute highest video quality you can get, set that on high bitrate. Shutter, I just leave on auto. You've got to have one way of controlling the amount of light that comes into the camera, and so I just leave mine on auto. I know people out there change the shutter depending on the frame rate. I won't really get into that. Basically, you use double the shutter of the frame rate that you're using. So, if you're shooting 30 frames per second, you put the shutter on 60. This is the way I control the amount of light coming into the camera, and so I leave that on auto. EV comp, if it's a sunny day, I'll put it on -0.5. If it's a cloudy day like it is today, I would put it on 0. White balance. So I made another video. I'll link these other videos that I made below. I think most people will be okay leaving it in auto white balance. If you find that your videos are really fluctuating, like on fall days, and it's going from cool to warm, you're going in and out of the shadows, go ahead and set your white balance to 5,000. Unless it's very, very cloudy, then you can go up to 5,500. The nice thing about the GoPros is you get an image, so you can look. Like, I can look at this camera and I can say, well, that white balance looked like it was a pretty good white balance. You can go all the way up to maybe 6,000 on a very cloudy day. But I found that 5,000 is just a setting that covers sunny days and cloudy days if it's not really too overcast and cloudy. And white balance is one of those things that I think you should play around with. Like I said, 5,000 works most of the time for me. ISO, min, I leave it on 100. ISO max, 3,200. Sharpness, I leave on low. I handle the sharpness in my post-production. This is one of those options that if you're not doing like post-production work, editing in a software like DaVinci Resolve, set the sharpness to medium. And that's a really good mix between something that's really just over sharpened and one that's going to look kind of dull unless you boost up the sharpness in post-production. So I leave mine on low because I handle that when I'm editing the video. All right, the color. This is another option that you can choose depending on whether or not you want to do post-production work. In other words, you're going to be editing the video. If you're going to be doing that, shoot it in flat color. That's going to give you the most dynamic range. If you're not going to be editing, put it in natural color. You can experiment with vibrant color. I find that to be a little oversaturated. The natural color looks really good, and I do use this sometimes. So if I'm going to be doing just quick edits, I don't want to mess around with color grading afterwards, I'll shoot in natural, but for the most part, I leave it in flat. And I'll make a video coming up in the future of how I use DaVinci Resolve. I can color correct the video in about 10 seconds. I've got this process down. I mean, all I have to do is really boost up the contrast a little bit, drop the shadows down, boost up the sharpness, boost up the highlights, and maybe just saturate it a little bit. And it literally, like, I got the workflow down to, maybe 10 seconds is an exaggeration, but 20, 30 seconds, I can get it done. And I'll show that in another video. Raw audio, I typically leave off. And then wind reduction, this is important. Now, I'm gonna make a video where I show some of the tips and tricks and things that I use to mount the GoPro. One of the things that I use is a foam windscreen. And if you're going to be using audio from the GoPro, get a foam windscreen and put the wind reduction to off. Do not use auto or on. It just sounds terrible. The foam windscreens, they're dirt cheap and they're super easy to put on, and they actually protect your GoPro should you drop it. So I definitely leave wind reduction to off. All right, so those are the settings that I use on my GoPro. Remember, practice makes perfect. So try these settings, get a whole bunch of video footage, and then mess around with a few settings and see what you like best. The more videos that you shoot, the better you're gonna get at this. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm gonna make a follow-up video of mounting options and a few other tips and tricks that I use for my GoPro because, like I said, settings are one thing, and then how you actually use and mount the camera are another thing. Combine both of those, and you're going to get some really good GoPro footage. If this video was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up for me. And if you want to see other videos about mountain biking and gravel riding, subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.